August 1945. The world fell silent, not because peace had arrived, but because humanity had seen something it was never meant to see. A single flash of light erased entire neighborhoods. Another turned human shadows into permanent scars burned onto stone. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. When the smoke cleared, the war was over, but something far more dangerous had begun. For the first time in history, mankind understood that it now possessed the power to erase itself completely. Scientists understood what they had unleashed. Politicians felt it, but rarely said it out loud. Ordinary people sensed the fear without fully understanding its shape. And yet, almost immediately after this unimaginable destruction, a new story was born. A comforting story. A hopeful one. What if the same atom that destroyed cities could also save them? Electricity without smoke, medicine powered by radiation, farms transformed by nuclear science. They called it the peaceful atom. But history has a habit of hiding its sharpest knives inside beautiful words. Because from the very beginning, nuclear energy was never just about peace. It was about power, about leverage, about deciding who would shape the future and who would be forced to depend on it. As the Cold War tightened around the world, the United States and the Soviet Union were not only racing to build bigger bombs, they were racing to control the meaning of nuclear power itself. Fear alone could not win allies. Hope could. In 1953, standing before the United Nations, President Dwight D. Eisenhower spoke calmly, almost gently, about sharing nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. He spoke of reactors that would power hospitals instead of missiles, of cooperation replacing annihilation. The world applauded. Cameras captured smiles. Newspapers printed hopeful headlines. But behind the applause, a deeper game was already in motion. And before we go any further into this story, if you enjoy deep cinematic narratives about hidden power, history, and the forces that quietly shape our world, take a moment to subscribe to Think Forward. These stories exist because curiosity still exists. Now listen carefully. Atoms for Peace was never just charity. It was strategy. Because sharing nuclear technology does not simply share energy, it creates dependence. Long-term relationships where one side always holds more knowledge, more control, more keys. Through carefully crafted agreements, the United States supplied research reactors, enriched fuel, and scientific training to dozens of countries. On paper, it looked like cooperation. In reality, it placed Washington at the center of a rapidly expanding nuclear world. But the recipients were not naive. Most of them were newly independent nations, emerging from decades of colonial rule. To them, nuclear power was not a gift. It was a symbol, a declaration of sovereignty, a claim to modernity, proof that they would no longer stand at the edges of history. In 1955, at the Bandung Conference, leaders from Asia and Africa made their position unmistakably clear. They condemned nuclear weapons as instruments of domination, yet demanded access to nuclear energy for development. They feared becoming victims of superpower wars, but refused to remain technologically dependent forever. This contradiction unsettled Washington. The assumption had been simple: assistance would produce loyalty. Instead, it produced ambition. Asian nations rejected U.S.-led regional nuclear centers, choosing instead to build programs under their own flags. Brazil refused to be reduced to a supplier of raw nuclear materials and demanded full technological partnership. Domestic politics, national pride, and economic realities repeatedly shattered American plans. What was meant to be influence began slipping out of control. And into that gap stepped another power, quietly, efficiently, without speeches. France. Unlike the United States, France's nuclear strategy was not driven by ideology. It was driven by necessity. Lacking natural energy resources and shaken by oil crises, France committed fully to nuclear power. Dozens of standardized reactors, massive industrial investment, a national survival strategy. And once France mastered nuclear technology, it did something different. It sold it. Not only to allies, not only to friends, but to those others avoided. South Africa, Iran, Iraq, China. France asked fewer questions and imposed fewer conditions. In some cases, it even offered technology without long-term control over its use. For nations seeking true technological sovereignty, this was irresistible. By the time the United States fully grasped what was happening, the nuclear world was no longer bipolar. It was multipolar, competitive, fragmented. Atoms for peace quietly faded into history. Grant programs ended, optimism cooled, but the legacy remained. Nuclear knowledge had spread, new suppliers had risen, and the peaceful atom had become far more complex than anyone had promised. Today, nuclear power lights cities and drives industries, but it also shapes geopolitics in ways most people never see. Every reactor is potential, every technology transfer is leverage, every agreement carries consequences that last generations. The story of civilian nuclear technology is not a story of good intentions or bad outcomes. It is a story of ambition wrapped in idealism, of power disguised as progress. And it leaves us with a final question worth sitting with. When humanity unlocked the atom, did it ever truly believe it could control what came next? Because in that moment, mankind didn't just open a new source of energy, it opened the most dangerous chapter in its own history. Thank you for watching, like the video, and subscribe to Think Forward.